Is Tunisia's revolution really over? Yet again, angry protesters take to the streets demanding jobs. The government blames outside elements for fomenting the turmoil. But are the politicians in denial? Is the post-revolution political system in Tunisia failing to address the aspirations of its youth? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. Tunisia. Is history repeating itself? A little over 5 years ago, a small-town fruit seller set himself on fire, his death prompting nationwide protests, demonstrators angry at a lack of work, angry at levels of corruption. Now, it appears to be happening again. A young job seeker in the town of Kasserine was fatally electrocuted last week while protesting against being turned down for a government job, and Tunisians took to the streets. As in 2011, the police have responded with tear gas. There are no bullets this time, but a dusk to dawn curfew is in place. Hashim Al-Bara sets up the story for us from the capital, Tunis.
Tunisia's Prime Minister faces the toughest challenge yet to his government. He's been in power for almost a year, but his authority has been challenged by this week's unrest, which has seen angry protests across the country. Some of these protests turned into looting and attacks on security forces and government buildings.
Many enemies do not wish to see Tunisia or the Tunisians successful. They feel undermined by the democratic process. They are doing all they can to disturb the harmony of our democracy and the historic transition period Tunisia has seen. The transition is inevitable. The transition is irreversible.
The opposition blames the government for the unrest, saying it has failed to implement genuine reforms. On the streets, people remain divided over how to solve Tunisia's simmering discontent.
I am totally against imposing a curfew. There are people who work at night. By imposing a curfew, you compromise their future. I want this government to go.
We have heard many promises in the past. Now it is time for major decisions. The government must take concrete steps to find jobs for the people. I do not know how, but that is their job.
Calls for a government reshuffle or new elections have been dismissed by commentators as a risky step. Elections were last held in October 2014. Many fear a new vote could lead to more instability. For the time being, life in Tunisia will be punctuated by a curfew that starts at 8 p.m. each evening and ends by dawn. A few months ago, a state of emergency was implemented following an attack that took the lives of 38 holiday makers in the resort of Sousse. So the security forces have extensive powers in curbing unrest and tackling the rise of armed groups. The state of emergency also puts restrictions on public gatherings. By imposing an ongoing curfew nationwide, the government hopes to contain the violence that had been threatening to spin out of control. But a curfew will hardly solve Tunisia's deep-rooted problems, and for many Tunisians, trust in their political leaders seems to be wearing thin. Hashim Al-Bara, Al Jazeera for Inside Story in Tunis.
Now, Tunisians aren't just protesting about unemployment, they're also upset about what they see as an increasingly unstable government. President Beji Caid Essebsi's critics say his policies are starting to mirror those of the former authoritarian ruler Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, who was, of course, driven out of Tunisia by the 2011 protests. Essebsi has been accused of a similar kind of nepotism after he allowed his businessman's son to become vice president of the ruling Nida Tunis party. And that appointment in November set off an avalanche of resignations. More than 40 members of the party have quit since then, which means the Islamist Ennahda party now holds the largest bloc in parliament. Okay, so let's bring in our guests. In Tunis, we have Houda Mzioudet, a political commentator and writer on Tunisian political affairs. Over in Istanbul, we have Monica Marks, visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, and she's a specialist in Tunisian politics. And in London, we have Roxane Farmanfarmaian, lecturer in international relations of the Middle East and North Africa at the University of Cambridge. Welcome to you all. Great to see you here to talk about this important issue. Houda, if we can start with you in Tunis, could you give us a sense of what the mood is, what the reaction has been in the capital to the events in Kasserine?
Well, since last night, President Beji Qaid al-Sibsi has given a speech in which he spoke about the events, but also accused some foreign elements of maybe fomenting those protests in Kasserine. So the mood is quite electric and very nervous. You can see that people did not. Their reaction to the events were more or less violent across the country. In Tunis, things were calmer, although there were a few clashes around some neighborhoods like Tadamun and Mnihla. But this morning, things are back to normal, I guess, in Kasserine, but also in other areas that have seen clashes since last week over unemployment protest following the death of a young Tunisian undergraduate in Kasserine.
Okay, so
there is expected to be.
No, go ahead.
Yes, there's expected to be a demonstration in Avenue Bourguiba today. We're not sure when it's going to take place, but generally speaking, people are. The mood is not going to go to become calm just today, because things are still simmering.
Okay, so things are still very tense
with regards to what's going on in the country, generally speaking.
Right, looking in from Istanbul, Monica Marks, have the events in Kasserine taken you by surprise?
No, not at all. This was entirely expected. Many of the grievances that we're seeing protesters espouse were at the very heart of the revolution in 2011, and even in protests that predated the revolution in Gafsa and the southern mining regions of Tunisia in 2008. So this was entirely predictable, and in many ways is a function of the failure of Tunisia's political class to begin to address some of those core socioeconomic grievances that sparked the revolution to begin with.
And as it stands, can you see the situation spiraling, its momentum spreading? Do you think history is indeed repeating itself?
What we're seeing parallels the Tunisian revolution in many ways. Some of these protests have similar grievances, similar origin points. But the fundamental difference is that we don't have a dictatorship in Tunisia at the moment. We do have a democratically elected government and quite a bit more freedom of expression in Tunisia. So the conditions are quite different, but it's also very difficult to predict in which direction this could go. The government's response has been ham-handed at times. The government promised that it would create 5,000 new public jobs in the governorate of Kasserine in a desperate attempt to quell the protests. And then the next day, a government spokesperson stepped out and said that was a communication error. So one could envision a scenario in which ham-handed handling by the government would contribute to more spiraling of these events.
Yeah, it does seem to have been a somewhat confused response. Roxane, in London, Tunisia was, of course, portrayed as a great success story, but under the surface, it seems to be very different.
Well, on one hand, it certainly is a success story in that it does have a government that is in power, that has been elected, and it has a new constitution. And I think that it is perhaps to be considered that setting up a democracy is not as easy as perhaps it was thought at the time of the Tunisian revolution. And in many ways, the driving force, the economy, which underscored so much of the uprisings at that time, has not really been addressed. It has been the political aspects that have taken the first pass. And so in many ways now the economy is coming back to haunt those that are in power, and they have got to now act to solve this underlying problem, which is not a factor of democracy, it is a factor of the economy of the country.
Okay, we'll come on to the economy in a minute, but when the President talks about, and the Prime Minister indeed, talk about the outside elements, i.e. ISIL, are fomenting trouble here, Roxane. What's your take on that? To what degree do you think that's a true interpretation of what's going on?
Oh, I think that's very real. Since the revolution, one of the things that has plagued Tunisia has been a great deal of terrorism, which was never that much part of the Tunisian experience. And it has certainly affected the government and the people enormously. It has destroyed tourism, for example, and the shooting of Sousse and in the on the beaches of Sousse and in the museum of Bardo, and really undercut one of the major sources of Tunisian income. It is clear that those that have referred to dirty hands or incitement by extremists of the activism that's going on right now in the streets comes from this real fear that there are extremist elements that are seeding the demonstrations and that are going to turn them into something that they're not originally having started from.
Monica Marks, is that something that you concur with, that ISIL is inflaming this situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that we understand Tunisia's economic woes in part through the framework of an economy under attack by terrorists. Part of ISIS's strategy in many different countries, including Turkey, has been to exacerbate pre-existing domestic problems. And one of the biggest pre-existing problems in Tunisia is this tension between underdeveloped interior regions, which are quite a bit poorer than the coastal areas, and problems of unemployment, etc. So by attacking the economy, ISIS has really been able to do a lot of damage. But at the same time, this is not entirely a product of ISIS and ISIS's attacks on the economy. ISIS is inflaming the situation, but if you look at a lot of human development indicators in Gosreen, it's been behind Tunis. There's been this gap between the interior and the developed coast for a long time. Illiteracy is about 20% higher in Gosreen. Unemployment is about 10% higher. Drinkable water is 40% less available in Gosreen than it is in Tunis. So we're also seeing these long simmering socioeconomic inequalities that just have not been addressed by governments before or after the revolution boiling over.
Okay, Roxane, thanks very much indeed. Let's just move on to the economy, as Roxane was referring to just now. As we've been saying, this latest string of protests is largely fueled by youth unemployment. And bear in mind that the figures I'm about to show you are estimates from the International Labour Organization back in 2014. It has actually got worse since then, but let's have a look at them anyway. In Tunisia, more than 40% of young people are unemployed. In neighbouring Libya, 1 in 4 of all young people is out of work. In Egypt, almost 40% of those between the ages of 15 and 24 do not have jobs. And in Iraq and in Jordan, it's about 1 in 3. And these numbers are indicative of a general problem in the Middle East and North Africa, of course, where youth unemployment averages almost 30%, which looks considerably worse when you compare it to the global average of 13%. So, Houda, as far as Tunisia is concerned, to what degree do you sense the people out on the streets find it difficult because of the lack of work that's around it, and are upset, and it creates this atmosphere of tension and angst against the government?
This anger that we have seen in the since last week has been simmering since the elections in 2014 of the current government led by Nida Tunis. The problem is that the government has been quite weak in dealing with some present challenges, including pressing up for certain projects that have been stalling since the Troika government led by Islamist Houda. Added to this, the infighting within Nida Tunis and the disintegration of the party between Beji Qaid Sibsi's son and Mohsen Marzouk's camp, and all of these political problems made young people think that this government is not serious enough to tackle the issue of unemployment, but also working on economic reforms. Unfortunately, you cannot stop young people from becoming angry and getting angry at not only at the inaction of the government, but also the institution of emergency and last night of curfew on nationwide curfew made things even worse.
Okay. Well, let's just focus just right now on the economy for a moment. Monica, if I can come to you. Given the pressures on the economy that there are with the terrorism attacks and so forth, and the fact that it was in a pretty parlous state anyway, can we blame the government for the position that the country is now in, or should the economy be in a better state right now?
Well, I think there are huge economic challenges that no interim transitional government is going to be able to address easily. That having been said, there are many different steps the government could have taken to help the situation that the government hasn't taken. What Houda was saying about Tunisians criticizing the ruling party, Nidat Tunis, which recently disintegrated, she has a lot of good points. Many Tunisians look at this government and think that they're asleep at the wheel because they've been spending more time on internecine clan conflicts, on infighting, than on really paying hard attention to some of the legislative changes and behavioral changes that Tunisia needs to adopt to move forward economically. And just quickly, a few of those changes are a very heavy bureaucracy. It's very difficult to start a business in Tunisia. Difficult for young people especially to get access to credit, to financial tools. A lot of corruption. Tunisia has done pretty much nothing to address corruption, which has been spreading since the revolution. It's been democratizing and diffusing in many ways. There's no anti-corruption commission. A lot of the young people that we've seen protesting on the streets have complained that in order to get a job, they actually have to pay a local official 2,000 or 3,000 dinars as a bribe, and that a lot of these public jobs are not being given in a meritocratic way, but that they're very corrupt. So the problems of youth unemployment are also tied to political indecision and political lassitude in terms of moving forward on issues like streamlining the bureaucracy, like tackling corruption, like creating a clearer investment code, legislative framework to stimulate growth.
And Roxane, I think it was the president who said you can't tell people who are hungry to be patient, but in a sense it's exactly what the Prime Minister has said this afternoon in his press conference, saying that solving Tunisia's problems is going to take time, and it's going to take 5 or 10 years, as we've already been discussing.
And indeed, the Tunisians feel they've been very patient because I would argue that the previous government under Ennahda also didn't seem to have the mechanisms and instruments to hand to really address some of the economic woes. And the most recent government has not been able to address a key element, for example, which is the terms with the mines in Gafsa in the south, where the phosphate is mined and is a major source of both employment and export for Tunisia, and the relationship with the government and the terms of how that mine has operated have not been working well. So I would agree with Monica, there are some structural problems that are very difficult to address, but the inefficiency and the lack of focus on the part of not just this government, but previous governments has been quite severe. Perhaps the only one that seems to have done quite a bit better was under Mehdi Jomai. He was the technocratic government that took part for a while between Nidat Tunis and the first major free elections. That seemed to be the only one that was able to allay some of the concerns of the population, but nonetheless they feel as though they've been very patient and that things have deteriorated. There are over 700,000 people in Tunisia out of work at the moment, and over 60% of those with graduate degrees are out of work. So there's a great sense also that the resources, the young and the educated resources of the country are simply not being used in order to get the economy back on track. And I think one of the frustrations also has been that in many ways the outside world has expressed such pleasure that Tunisia has been able to be that spotlight on in the Arab world of starting a democracy without really putting their money where their mouth is and saying we are going to support the economy and the needs of this country in order to be sure to start off the economy on the right foot. And so for 5 years it has in some ways languished, and only now is France, for example, stepping up and saying we have got to start supporting Tunisia and help them with development in the south and with youth unemployment.
Right, yeah, France prepared to put forward 1 billion euros over 5 years, I believe. Houda, I'm going to come to you in a second, but Monica, if I can just come to you on what Roxane was just talking about, and as far as the economy is concerned, the inefficiency of the economy, if you like, because it still favours the old elites, doesn't it, in many ways, and that would be a deep source of frustration for unemployed youth on the streets.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Roxane made a lot of good points. There are deep-seated structural inequalities, lack of development in the interior versus the coasts, etc. A lot of widespread corruption, heavy bureaucracy. A lot of people say that this is in part a problem of the legislative framework, but it's also a problem of mindset, habits accumulated over decades of dictatorship that served a select cronyistic few. So these problems are going to take a lot of time to address, that's for sure. Tough love will be needed. Honest conversations are important between the government and the citizenry. What we've seen a lot of governments do, with perhaps the exception of the Mehdi Joma government that Roxane was mentioning, is promise in a kind of desperate palliative attempt to take the edge off social unrest, promise an expansion of public sector jobs. The problem is Tunisia's public sector already is responsible for the creation of over 65% of jobs in Tunisia. It's very bloated. The state can't afford to keep creating new jobs. We need to create a situation in Tunisia with, of course, lots of international help that is much more conducive to small and medium-sized enterprises and a lot less corrupt, a lot clearer.
And Houda, coming full circle to where we started, right now, do you think the government has a grasp of the seriousness of the situation, how much discontent there is on the streets? I mean, you talked about how tense the atmosphere is still. Do you think that the curfews will resolve this situation, that things will settle down and people will just have to be patient, as the Prime Minister said today, or do you think this could yet continue?
I think the imposition of curfew might reduce the tensions for a bit, especially with the accounts of looting and vandalism from some criminals, which makes sense that the government has instituted the curfew. But in the long term, I don't think the crisis will be diffused because those people who were protesting were doing that in a peaceful way. Just this morning, I was watching something on my Facebook regarding with young people from Kasserine who were volunteering to clean the streets after the clashes, which shows some readiness from those people to protest in a civilized way. But it's very hard balance for this government to try and respond to those pressing needs and not giving young people unrealistic promises of giving 600,000 jobs or in 2016, as the current Minister of Commerce, Mohsen Hassan, has promised a couple of days ago. So let's wait and see how things will work in the next few days, because it's very hard, to gauge the reaction of people, especially in the current events at the border with Algeria and Libya, where some of those, some radical elements, including ISIL, are wanting to take advantage of the chaos that they see in the country and capitalize on it. But I personally think that more communication from the current government with young people, especially the young graduates in those regions, will be more efficient, at least in the short term, to try and find a solution to this deep crisis.
Okay, thank you very much to our guests, Houda Mzioudet, Monica Marks and Roxane Farmanfarmaian. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on the programmes page of our website, aljazeera.com, and you can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or indeed just tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and all the team here, it's goodbye for now.